Welcome to Overwatch. Well, that was it. The beta is done and dusted, and everyone who wanted to try it has had their shot at doing so before it goes behind a $40 price tag. As someone who managed to play the game back in February 2015, then from day one of the beta, I figured I'd give myself my thoughts of where we're at and where we could be going. There's a few things unfinished from the beta to really tighten up the game, but a lot of things have certainly improved. Can anyone else remember when McCree had no damage drop-off and was sniping people across the map? Well, if you didn't have a chance to play the game back then, just imagine the experience of meeting McCree at close range and murdering you happening at medium and long ranges over a certain MMR. It was fun. It wasn't fun, that was sarcasm. I'll round out the intro by saying, well, I want to see what you guys thought too. Not asking for essays or anything, but if you found something in particular frustrating, it might be worth pointing out in the comments, or if it was particularly enjoyable. I'll also be doing a follow-up on the new player questions during the downtime, as people were asking tons, and it's great. It makes my life really easy. Oh, and footage in the background is just some random beta matches. This is one of those cliff notes and record separate kind of things. I have no idea what's going on back there. The first and foremost pressing issue, of course, is the competitive and ranked system. Back in December, I remember meeting with the European team, a great bunch of guys, and AlphaCast and I talked in depth about how competitive in some way was needed, a ranked ladder to keep people in and hooked. I still think it's really important because one of the things I've seen people say is, well, I played it for a week and there's no reason to come back. Well, I personally disagree. I've been playing the game daily for months after all. The opportunity for ranked progression is often a big draw for the long term. So when they put it in and it, well, wasn't good, well, I'm actually glad they took it back to retool it rather than stubbornly sticking to it. I think this is a really good decision. Hopefully we'll get something very soon after launch. So let's talk about what I would want in a perfect world. Well, to get to that, let's talk about the important concepts that drive a ranked system. The first is in the format, and there's probably a design term for this internally or whatever, but I'll just use the term validity. Validity meaning the system works in determining which team was better. In a high validity format and system, better teams will win out more consistently, while in a low validity system, it'll take longer to separate out. Validity basically just being the measure of does the better team win more often. The biggest issue with what they were using was this validity problem. The format meant that better teams would often get thrown into a single determining match on King of the Hill, and while that was fun, it had a host of its own problems that I've went into before, i.e. it had no reflection on the results previously, and it was not very valid. And the result had, well, again, ultimately low validity overall. This, coupled with the fact that ranking up was a simple gain of points rather than anything elo based, meant that people worked out that you could hit Master with a win rate of 40% and everything kinda came down to how long you'd played. What's the right answer? Well, the simplest answer is always going to be stopwatch. It's a known quantity and fairly reflective of skill, its biggest drawback being the implementation of a second win condition, namely time, rather than how far did you get in the map. But the ability to push through an entire map smoothly and quickly still feels like something that should be rewarded to me. If they can come up with something, all I hope is that they enshrine the validity concept. Better teams need to be able to distinguish themselves against worse ones and win reliably. This isn't Hearthstone, it's an FPS. It might not be as die-hard competitive as Quake Arena 1 vs 1s, but I'll always push for the high skill being rewarded end of this kind of thing. I'm rather anti-blue shell, if you get my meaning. And that was a good few minutes on comp, but I don't want to have the video entirely be about the competitive system, so let's draw back our focus a little bit. Talk about the game as a whole. It's fun. It's still fun. I enjoy myself when playing, despite having plenty of hours in the game. The issues that a lot of people run into, stuff like team choices being wonky, no one wanting to play tank and support, has a tendency to kind of iron itself out over time. And I will say just anecdotally, the amount of people I've had start playing and become Mercy mains is staggering. I'll also say that in my own circle of friends, the problem actually goes the other way. Not enough Genjis and Tracers, too many supports and tanks. I think there's only a few heroes right now with major issues. A few could use tune-ups, D.Va for example. New players love her, but they'll learn with time that she has a boatload of weaknesses and not that many strengths, but I'll focus on two in specific. Winston. Oh, Winston. You're going to struggle to balance him in his current form with no hero limits. A character that can deal consistent AoE damage without aiming and gets progressively stronger the more there are of him is going to be really tough. I've always rankled slightly against Winston, and I'll state it again. I understand Winston's place in the game. A fairly simple front line that can create a beachhead, also serving as the easy but inefficient option against something like Tracer or Genji. While it'll be faster to use Soldier 76 for example to kill one of those two, Winston can do it reliably and safely. but everything that Winston does is either reliable or safe, or reliable and instantly killed. There's very little finesse to the character past learning how he matches up with people. My own pet theory on how to fix him is adding a sweet spot to the Tesla cannon, something like just a circle of higher damage out a meter in front of him that takes higher damage and lower damage everywhere else around him. Putting people into that area gives you higher damage, and suddenly you're incentivized to position well. You're trying to get people into that little area, and it still works really well against clumps, but does reliable damage to everything else around. It takes a little bit more skill to get maximum use out of him, a headshot, if you will, for Winston. Right now, in the pro scene, it's especially starting to get out of hand. Having 3 Winstons at once, for example, means literally half the team doesn't need to aim at all in a first-person shooter. That ain't good. Second one I'll bring up is Symmetra. The nerf to her shields worked. I was actually surprised. She's probably got a much healthier win rate and is seen a lot less on attack now. I imagine on defense her win rate is still pretty high. I'd probably ballpark it to the 60 to 65 percentiles, but, well, 25 shields is a mechanic that could probably do with vanishing away. Something active, something involved. I've always been a fan of giving her a kind of power word shield mechanic, for example. A temporary boost of shields that has a cooldown on that individual afterwards, you know, the weakened soul kind of effect. Not a barrier like Zarya, just shields. Makes her feel more like a support too. Those two are the obvious outliers to me in terms of where some attention is really required, Winston in general being dangerously oversimple, and Symmetra from needing just something else interesting in there now that the shield mechanics kind of petered out and fading away into the background. I think Zenyatta is fine, even though he gets brought up a lot. He's vulnerable but shockingly powerful in the right hands. Might need a bit of a love tap just to, balance out his healing a little bit, but I think he's overall in quite a good place. Torbjorn I think is sleeper OP for reasons that most people don't expect. His damage output is insane individually, but it kind of needs to be to offset his weaknesses. I kind of like where he is right now. Tracer's ult probably charges a bit too fast. When people get good at target prio with her, pulse bombs that feel so reliable, it's crazy. And last but not least, the McCree nerf was great, and it just needs a little polish on the animations, really.
Stop recording, they have a fucking amazing game as Hanzo.
Otherwise, a lot of heroes are in a good place. The only overlaps really design-wise that concern me are Winston and D.Va, who might need a little bit of crowbarring apart just to make them feel kind of different. Everyone else is pretty different except for those two and fun in their own ways. As someone who plays just about everyone, or tries to, they all take something differently to make work effectively, and that feels good. In terms of map, Payload and King of the Hill still work better than 2 control points, and that's both in terms of fun had and validity. I think 2 control points will remain the weakest and by far the least competitively viable map type without some major retooling. It's just the nature of how that kind of thing works. You crash into their defenses until you win a fight, and then you either take 2/3 of the point or all of it after that, rather than the more gradated Payload or King of the Hill. Hybrid is fine though, like King's Row is honestly probably still the best map right now, and is currently becoming the Dust 2 of Overwatch. I will say that I think Blizzard has kind of sent it into a win rate centric mentality as a sign of map quality. So for example, most defenses of 2 control points tend to start with a statement on win rates. But I'll just say be careful with that. It can be perfectly balanced but frustrating or uninteresting at the same time. And it sounds like I'm harping on the game a bit. It's just difficult to talk about positives in specific, or rather it's easy for me to find stuff that seems a little bit off. So let me say this. It's a Wednesday afternoon as I record this. Overwatch is down and I've been playing it and casting it all previous week. And I've also been playing it for months and months previous. And right now all I really kind of want to do is go back and play it a bit more. I imagine that most people in the comment section and watching the video feel pretty similarly. I've played it with friends who are new, friends from Closed Beta 1 and Closed Beta 2, and all sorts of different people. The overwhelming majority have told me today, man, I'd really just kind of like to play Overwatch right now. That's a pretty good sign, I think.
No, it isn't.
At the end of the day, you could call me a bit of a biased source of information. I earn some money off YouTube after all by talking about the game, but I still feel like the same guy I was back in November 2014. The guy excited to talk about a game that has so many individual little pieces that all come together in such interesting ways. The guy eager to learn and try and figure out how to master as many different aspects of those games as an individual can.
They're all just sort of... We need like pressure on, because what's happening is they're just massing up and we have no pressure on them.
Yeah.
We're just sort of sat in the point and letting them do it.
And while it's not perfect and there's definitely space to improve, I still have so many things I want to talk about regarding the game, and I look forward to doing that soon. Thanks for watching to the end of a somewhat long-winded feedback video. On this outro screen, by the way, I'll try and shove up my beta stats full screen. Yours might be a bit longer than mine. You might have actually managed to get more playtime in than I did over the open beta week. I spent 2 evenings casting after all, that's my excuse. Objective time is usually where I'm ahead of most people, by the way. Compare that stat from me to you guys, but I did play a lot of Genji to try and carry my friends a little, so it's probably a little bit lower on the average than it normally is. I'm also curious to hear what hero you guys played the most over the beta. Toodles.